and welcome back to another episode of KBVR-TV's geekiest talk show, Geeking Out About It.
We're here to talk about everything and anything in nerd culture and try to strengthen the nerd community, as well as expand our horizons.
This week you may have gathered that we've set our sights on a particular topic that traditionally is not associated with geekdom, James Bond.
That's right, we're covering the classic spy movies that have endeared themselves to all of us since 1962.
Some of you may be wondering why we've chosen to cover this topic. It's certainly not obscure, and in fact, it's very difficult to find a person that hasn't at least heard of James Bond. But it's not really considered a nerdy thing because of all the marketing live-action thriller sequences that are in the new movies. So it's a pretty standard audience.
But similar things can be said about Star Wars in its modern incarnation, and it still very much belongs on this show.
Precisely. Besides, if you've ever watched an old Bond film, you've seen some pretty extreme campiness in the gadgets and plot lines. Not nerdy? I don't think so.
Of course, the real reason we decided to cover James Bond franchise is due to its long and illustrious history. There's so much to dive into, and we just had to make an episode about it.
That is completely true. The unstoppable Bond franchise is indeed around for a very long time, and it makes it stand out. So this has been consistently remade over and over again, not encountering much in difficulty, but over the decades there has been 6 different actors that have taken on the role of Bond. Varying in degrees of success, of course, but they're all Bond. Now, the series did have some help from levels of compartmentalization between storylines, making it much easier to swap out cast members without really affecting the cohesion of the franchise, but it's still an impressive feat. Now, many people have played the same character in the same franchise, but it's still recognizable to have each different person. With that, I'm throwing it to Jachob for a brief history.
We have Ian Fleming, the British novelist, to thank for the creation of the character of James Bond. In 1953, with his first novel, Casino Royale, Bond, also known as 007, began his story as a Cold War operative with special training in intelligence and operations. Bond was designed as a spy with the best of gadgets to thwart Soviet operatives, take down criminal rings, and of course, being a top-class womanizer. After his original novel, Fleming wrote 12 more and a collection of short stories, with the Bond character taking a role in all of them. In 1958, Fleming wrote the novel Dr. No, which in 1962 was adapted into a screenplay, the first of the Bond films. Fleming was a serviceman in the Naval Intelligence Division in World War II, and his inspiration for the Bond character came from a few of the commandos he knew during his service. The name 007 came from the British success of cracking the German diplomatic code. The Zimmermann telegram coded 0075 was cracked, and this led to the US entering the war. This material was coded 00, meaning highly classified, which is where 007 gets the 2 zeros. Fleming had said when he had written the novels, Bond was not meant to age, staying in his mid-30s. The film Dr. No has been nominated for 4 film awards and won 2 more. More importantly, the film Dr. No started one of the most successful action movie series in history. To date, there have been 24 official Bond films grossing over $16.3 billion, with the top grossing Bond film movie, Skyfall, making $1.2 billion alone. The current Bond is Daniel Craig, being the 6th Bond. He has made 4 movies, but there may be another on its way, No Time to Die. This would be the 25th movie in the series of films. Fleming said he wanted Bond to be boring and dull while having strange things happen around him. In his exact words, exotic things would happen to him and around him, but he would remain a neutral figure. With that, back to Sam.
Man, I really like that new segment. It's really interesting. We got a lot of different types of tidbits of information in there, some of which are kind of important, especially the factoid about the 24 different Bond movies. There's 24 of them?
Yeah, there is 24 Bond films, but that is not all of them. Mm-hmm. There have also been some unofficial Bond movies that have been made by fans and other production studios.
So what makes it an unofficial Bond movie?
If it's not produced by Eon Productions.
Okay, so basically the rundown is if you're making a Bond movie, you got to be this one guy.
Yeah, you have to be part of Eon Productions because they own the rights to Fleming's novels.
Interesting. So you also briefly mentioned that there's been 6 different Bonds.
Yes, there has been over the years because the character Bond was not meant to be a continuous storyline. Mm-hmm. Bond was created as a representation of a certain stereotype, right? He was meant to represent a secret agent with a certain amount of intelligence, to be almost aloof but not quite arrogant, but be confident enough in himself. And that's where 007 came from. It's not something that's meant to be like one storyline passed down. It's a Bond film if it's 007 and it features him being a womanizer and there's alcohol and violence and he's doing crazy things against villains, right? That's the Bond film.
So there's definitely some classic Bond tropes that go into each movie, gadgets and
Absolutely.
all the different women that he interacts with, because, you know, James Bond. There's some pretty interesting things that happen in Bond movies.
True, and just like a fun tidbit in there, Sean Connery, the first Bond in Dr. No, is the most deadly Bond, with over 92 kills in the films. So
Really?
Yeah.
It's not Daniel Craig?
No, Daniel Craig is the second most dangerous. But
Okay.
Daniel Craig's not done yet, right? We've got another film, No Time to Die, possibly coming out in 2020.
So he's still got enough time to like blow up a boat or something.
True, but Daniel Craig has drank the most drinks on screen, with an average about 20 or more in every one of his films.
You know, I love this. This is some very nice information.
Yeah.
This is stuff I did not know.
Yeah,
the fact
so
that they
Daniel
have a
Craig
kill
is the
count,
most drunk of the Bonds.
the most drunk of the Bonds. That's really cool. How many movies was Sean Connery in? Do you know?
I believe it was 6 or 7.
Okay, wow.
He was in a few movies.
So that gives him like an upper hand, because Daniel Craig's catching up, right?
Yeah, he's on 4 right
yeah,
now.
he's on
No Time to
4.
Die will be 5.
5. So he's just a little bit behind. So he's got to shoot some more guys, which I think
Yes.
he'll be able to do, especially because the movie's No Time to Die.
True. But I mean, Daniel Craig was in Skyfall, and of course that made so much money, and that's probably one of the most successful Bond films.
Oh yeah, for sure. Skyfall was one of those really like big ones.
Yeah.
I know that when it came out, there was a whole bunch of people that were really looking forward to it. Personally, I'm a fan of the new Bond movies because they're kind of like hardcore. But at the same time, I also love me some of the original campiness. There's a few times where Bond movies are, you know, thrown on for too long. But we're talking about these Bonds, and I think we should get into telling everyone who the Bonds are. So
I agree.
we mentioned Sean Connery multiple times, and for all the viewers out there, Sean Connery is the first and most famous Bond. He set the bar.
He starred in Dr. No, which was the first film, and I think that is what set the precedent for this franchise being developed, because I think that's part of why it was so successful. It was coming out in the 60s, and it really showed off this cool new character, and it's in the middle of the Cold War, just before the Cold War really gets into its stride, and I think they're playing off of that, and I think it's really a movie that gets into, you know, the viewers' hearts and really makes them love it, right? It has grit to it.
And Sean Connery himself really sets that up for being like a lovable character.
Right.
Because he voices everything that happens. And if you've seen Sean Connery's work, he's very lovable. I love Sean Connery.
Very lovable, and he portrays the Bond so beautifully because he has this almost gruffness to him, but he is so much a gentleman, right? He definitely treats the ladies like a womanizer would. And I think that's a great part of it.
Now, another thing is that the second Bond, David Niven. Now, he starred in Casino Royale, which, as far as I'm aware, is the first book that was written, and like you said, which was not produced by the production team. So it's one of those rare things that you were talking about earlier, where it's not exactly a canonized version of Bond, but we include him anyways.
Right, and that was the first Casino Royale movie. There have been 3 of them. So I think the first 2 weren't all that great, but the one in 2006 with Daniel Craig is probably the best of the Casino Royale movies, and that was produced by Eon Productions.
And this Bond, while he's not exactly loved, he's generally thought of as kind of one of the lower tier Bonds. Now, like you can rank the different Bonds based on whatever you feel, but it's all personal opinion, especially leading into this next guy, George Lazenby, which was the least loved Bond. He only appeared in Her Majesty's Secret Service and was generally disliked for being smug and humorless. Not exactly Bond tropes, huh?
No, I think part of Bond is that there are funny moments in it, right? And he is supposed to be smug because he's the best. There's a reason they contracted Bond to do this mission, because no one else could.
Now, one of those people that definitely had do some goofy things was the next Bond, Roger Moore. Now, he took over after Lazenby in the 70s and early 80s, and he had a pretty long run as Bond.
Right, but I mean, one thing to keep in mind with all of these Bond actors is that they don't necessarily do them chronologically. You know, Sean Connery did multiple movies after other actors had played Bond.
Yeah.
Right, so with any of these actors, it's not necessarily that they took on a section of the films. They've been in multiple films throughout a large time span.
That's the biggest thing to address too. There is no timeline.
Right, the
there
character.
is none. He's supposed to stay the same age, so he just does.
Right, the character isn't like, it's not like Doctor Who, where there's one storyline that goes throughout the entire thing, and each actor is playing a different part of that character's life.
Yeah.
Bond is a singular entity, and anyone can portray him as long as you're doing it in the Bond tropes and you have those mannerisms with you.
Of course, there are like series within the Bond sections, such as Daniel Craig's series Continued Stories.
Right, which they dive further into the backstory of Bond as well as M.
Oh yeah, which is really interesting. Up next though, we have Timothy Dalton. Now he took over when Moore retired, and he was kind of in the late 80s. So he was relatively disliked for playing Bond because he was too serious and down to earth, but people liked the swagger and the far-flung adventures.
Right, and I think, you know, as he did more of the movies, he got better. His first couple weren't as good as his third and fourth, because as he got into the role, he really started, you know, taking that stride.
The next Bond is Pierce Brosnan. Now, he didn't have as many good movies, but he was still a good Bond. He looked good as Bond. Now, he had some interesting things. Technology had been advancing, and computer graphics were just becoming a thing, so they're like, hey, let's throw some CGI in those movies. That was a mistake. They threw a bullet in the middle of the opening sequence, which is generally not liked.
Right, and I think part of that is because it wasn't done very well.
That is probably true. Now, the last and the most relevant Bond currently, the modern Bond, is Daniel Craig. Now, Daniel Craig is your favorite Bond.
Yeah, obviously, Daniel Craig's my favorite, and I'm a little biased because I think, you know, they're the best done films, besides Goldfinger. You know, the more modern ones have...
You have an exception for Goldfinger.
Well, Goldfinger and then From Russia with Love, right? Those are both good. But the newer movies are a little more modern. They have the modern graphics in them.
Modern storytelling.
Yeah, they have modern storytelling. They follow that heroism trope, and so I think that's a little more
now,
lovable,
personally,
right?
As much as Daniel Craig is amazing, my favorite Bond is Sean Connery.
Undeniably an amazing Bond.
You know, I just have to give him super credit for that. With that, we're going to go to a real quick break, but when we come back, we're talking villains.
So I first heard about Omen through the radio program. My roommate was a DJ, and I hopped on his show a couple times, and that was infatuating, and I immediately fell in love with being able to play whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted, and coming in late at night and sharing my music with whoever was awake at that time was just so exciting and so liberating. Just the ability to explore and learn so many things from so many different mediums is really what benefited me and my experience here in media. Coming out of here, I definitely think I'm going to be looking at the world in a more professional lens. I definitely think that, you know, working as part of a team and making things for other people is something that I've definitely taken out of being here and being on the creative video team especially. My name is Ziad Al-Kaulak. I'm a creative video consultant, a senior studio engineer, and a professional conspirator here at Orange Media Network.
Welcome back, everybody. Now, before the break, we discussed the different actors who have played the iconic character of James Bond. But now it's time to tackle another set of characters, the villains. You know, villains are kind of a big part of it, but also not particularly a memorable part of it, depending on the movie.
I would agree. I would agree that most of the Bond villains are pretty forgettable. There are a few who I don't necessarily remember the names of, but I remember what they did in the films.
And the struggle with Bond villains that everyone needs to know is the fact that they all have crazy names. Like, they don't have memorable names. It's not something that you can just be like, oh yes, it is Darth Vader, you know, iconic, you know? But they have names like Hugo, last name who I don't even remember.
Right, and it's not names that are really easy to remember, I agree. It's names that are like Paul Rappenstein, like something so obscure that you've never heard before.
Yeah, and you know, there's certain villains that, like, there's James Bond villains that are like really important to the story of James Bond, like Ernest Stavro.
Right.
Like, how am I supposed to remember that guy's name? Like, I don't remember that off the top of my head. I mean, Stavro is one of the more memorable last names, but there's other characters, there's side characters that are much more memorable because of their gimmicks and because of their names. One of those examples is a man called Oddjob. Oddjob throws his hat. Everyone remembers the hat throwing guy?
Yeah.
Yeah, classic hat throwing guy. See, he's a lot more memorable as a James Bond villain, although he's not like the main villain. You know, he's just one of those guys that's around. But he's so much more memorable as a villain just because he has an interesting thing that he does, which is throw his hat, and he has a recognizable name, Oddjob.
Right, and a lot of the villains just don't have that. Or the villain's backstory just sucks and isn't there.
There's other things. There's another character. There's one other character. I remember two James Bond villains off the top of my head. So first is Oddjob. Second is a man named Jaws. Jaws has some silver teeth, and he's, oh man, like whoever came up with that, like I don't know what exactly was going on in that meeting, but I guess it worked because I remember him. I guess I remember him, so you did your job.
Right, I think the problem with Jaws is that he reminds me more of an Austin Powers villain, right? Which is the parody, is the knockoff to James Bond. It's making fun of it.
And like Dr. Evil is basically a ripoff of Ernest.
Right, but Dr. Evil's
so much
memorable.
more recognizable.
Right. It's Dr. Evil. Like, how can you not remember Dr. Evil and Mini and 2?
Evil.
Like, those are so easy to remember, unlike any of the Bond villains.
It's so true. It's so true. That's really where Bond's struggle is. But with that, I keep thinking of all of these villains and all of these times that I've just been like thinking about, like Jaws. My head is stuck on Jaws right now, and it just makes me want to talk about my least favorite Bond movies, my top 3 least favorite Bond movies. You know, like I think that's some really good thing to step into. You looked concerned there for a moment, Jacob.
I'm a little concerned. You said your least favorite.
Oh yeah.
Okay, I prepared my most favorite, my top 3 favorite.
Oh, I see.
I thought we were doing favorites.
Oh no, I chose my top 3 least favorite.
Oh, okay.
So you did your.
I did my
most
top
favorite?
3. So
Okay.
why don't we just go back and forth, and we'll make this work.
Oh yeah. Well, I'll kick it off as I'm kind of in a rambling bad mood generally. So with that, I'm gonna tell you about my third favorite now. Third least favorite. Third worst. The third worst James Bond movie, in my personal opinion, is Moonraker. This is where Jaws is. Okay. This is why I have a strong passion for remembering who this guy is because I dislike this movie so much. And it's not because it's like just horribly made, it's because of the concept. Now, this movie came out in 1979, if I remember correctly, which is just a little bit after Star Wars came out. So, you know, everyone was in a sci-fi kick mood, you know? We're like, oh, they did a sci-fi movie, it was super successful. We can do that too. So they're like, yeah, what can James Bond do that's kind of sci-fi related? Oh, we can send him to space, where they have laser battles and space suits.
Right,
and the villain with weird teeth.
Right, and I think that was way too far-fetched for a Bond film.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Bond films are supposed to be down to earth. They're supposed to be gritty. They're supposed to have these mean fight scenes. They're not supposed to be in space. It was too much for a Bond film to try and say, you know, we have this thing that's working, and we're trying to put it in space.
The space aspect stretched it too much. It's just not Bond to me. Anyways, what about you? What's your third favorite Bond movie?
Third favorite, I think would have to be Goldfinger.
Okay.
Because Sean Connery's wonderful, obviously, but the cinematography in that and the artistic style really brought it home, as well as a good storyline and Sean Connery. I think that's really what made that movie work, is that it was a good storyline, the cinematography was good, you could follow it, and Sean Connery.
Sean Connery. I have to agree with you there. I do like me some Goldfinger. That's a good movie.
Yeah.
Moving on to my second least favorite James Bond movie, Octopussy, 1983, I believe. But for the most part, in Octopussy, you don't even know what's going on. You're just watching James Bond go around doing some stuff. He's dressed as a clown for some reason, and then you just get left as the audience, not really knowing what's going on, just stumbling around a bit. You go from one plot point to the next, and it's very similar to a particular someone that I know who likes to direct his movies just to subvert your expectations. I'll get into that at another time. But James Bond kind of goes to extreme levels of campiness in this movie, where there's a specific scene where he's in a crocodile submarine because someone thought that was a good idea, I guess.
Once again, I think it was James Bond. They have a style. And, you know, we're going to try and make a submarine crocodile. Yeah, it's going to work, you know?
But then, to add insult to injury, they have a whole sequence where James Bond swings on vines like Tarzan and does the whole thing.
Yeah, which just didn't work.
That's not James Bond.
No.
All right.
Okay.
Give me your second.
Skyfall.
Give me your second. Skyfall.
Skyfall.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
Arguably one of the better James Bond movies, because it not only looked at James Bond, it looked at M's backstory, right? Who is James Bond's superior and who's giving James Bond all these orders. But it didn't just have action and grit and fight scenes, which all were incredible. It had story. It had background to it. It gave it some sustenance, and Daniel Craig, because Daniel Craig's my favorite.
I see.
And he holds himself in such a way that he portrays Bond beautifully, and he holds everything about that.
So a lot of pull for Bond for you is Sean Connery and Daniel Craig.
Right.
Got it. Okay.
Right.
Locked it down. Now, moving from that, we'll transition a little bit into my number one least favorite James Bond movie, Die Another Day, 2002. I remember it like it was yesterday, because I was 2 years old at the time. This movie, though, it has such a strong start. It gives you a concept where James Bond had been captured and he was being tortured for 14 months. You know, that's really interesting. That's an interesting concept to run off of. But then he gets let go and rescued. He's rescued by MI6. They take him back and they start talking to him about everything that happened. But then they decide that James Bond isn't useful for them anymore. He's like, okay, you're kind of a washed-up agent now. You got completely removed, and you don't got the skills anymore. So then they let him go. They let James Bond go, and he still wants to complete his mission that he was on in the first place.
And of course, he's James Bond.
Oh yeah, he just does it. He's like, I'm gonna go do it.
Right.
So he decides, you know what? I don't need MI6. I'm just gonna do it by myself. So then he goes out, gets a haircut. And now all of a sudden he's back up to speed, and he's the most gifted James Bond in the world again. Because for some reason, I guess that works. Like, it didn't hold the fact that he was like still trying to get used to everything again, because he had been tortured for 14 months. And
Right.
it just cut to him being like, all right, pew, 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 you're dead. I'm James Bond. You know, and then, the overall villain plan. It didn't make sense. It's like,
No.
I'm gonna laser James Bond. He's like riding this little ski thing, and he goes off the cliff and hooks into the side of it and slams down, and it has the worst CGI scene in any James Bond movie, which is the tidal wave. It'll go
Right.
down in infamy. Oh
Right.
man,
It
the
was
tidal wave.
horrible. It was horrible.
Anyways.
I will agree with you that is also one of my least favorites.
Getting off of that, let's get on a positive note. Jacob, give me your number one.
My number one is the 2006 Casino Royale. Because of
Daniel Craig.
Daniel Craig, obviously. I'm basic sometimes. And the construction scene, the construction fight scene.
The parkour, yeah, which
The
is what we
parkour
have
scene,
decorated our set as.
which is incredibly done. It's so beautiful. And you know, you and I were talking earlier, and you mentioned the fact that he doesn't just like do these magical things that he couldn't do. He stops for a moment, he uses his brain, he thinks about, oh, if I break this and then I do this, I can vault across this gap. And you know, it's just so beautifully done.
I love how James Bond fights with his brains instead of just like trying to like jump off buildings. He's like, yeah.
Right.
And Casino Royale inspired the set design today. We got the Hawaiian shirt with the pants and then the construction helmet to represent that specific scene. But as much as talking about our favorite James Bond movies and such has been a great time, let's go to some Keep Talking. Hello everyone and welcome. Now you're probably thinking, why is he holding a VR headset? Well, that's because in this segment we're going to be playing some Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes. For those of you who know the game, you're probably thinking, isn't that a SWAT game? Well, it's not when you dress for the occasion. Now, Bond is always in a situation by himself and he doesn't have any assistance, so that's what I'll be doing today, so wish me luck. Okay, so some villain has trapped me and put them in their lair. And there's a bomb. Oh no, that's not good. No, I'm good. Scenario, James Bond has been captured by a villain and they've trapped him in a room and locked the door. And they put a bomb because they're evil. I've got a setup of wires, some symbols, and a white button that says abort. There's also to keep in mind this clock because that could play a key feature into this. Now, James Bond always has to do things by himself. And one thing that I've learned when dealing with a lot of these is often it's the fourth wire. So, okay. So that's kind of the key to the wires, is figuring that out. Now, the tricky bit is going to be figuring out these. Okay. Let's see. Is there any important information there? Okay. So now I just have to try and find the order of this. All right. So with this guy, it's just a guessing game. Okay. I guessed right the first time. What do you think? This or... No, it's probably not the one. If I'm... Oh, man. Let's just go for it. Okay, now there's two left. It's a 50-50 shot, right or left. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo, catch a tiger by its toe. That one. Okay, well that's the last of that one. Okay, so we got a white abort button. We got 3 minutes left on the clock. I'm feeling pretty good because I think I still have 2 X's left. So, I think I'll hold this down. It's yellow. 5! Woo! Okay, that's how it's done. James Bond always wins. Well, that worked. Was not expecting to be able to do that, but I pulled it off. Well, with that, back to the studio.
Welcome back. Well, Sam, I want to congratulate you on defeating that bomb. That looked stressful.
I know. It was so stressful, but I feel so accomplished after doing it. That was my first time being it by myself.
I'm very proud of you and very James Bond-like to get through it and make that happen.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, that is all we have for tonight's episode. We hope you enjoyed it, and we hope you tune in next week as we talk about another topic. Also, check out more content by KBVR-TV and check out our YouTube page where all the full episodes will be posted. If you want to keep up to date with the show and the rest of KBVR's awesome productions, you should also check out our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages where we post constant updates and tons of extra content. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great night.